Commander He-jin stood at his usual spot near the panoramic windows of the Galactic Fortress Yongsan. His tall, scaled figure cast a long shadow across the polished floor as he watched another alien fleet limp away in defeat. The Moraxian ships, once proud and gleaming, now bore the scars of their failed assault. Their weapons had proved useless against the fortress's defenses, just like the hundreds of other species before them. The fortress itself was a marvel of engineering, stretching 20 kilometers across space. Its outer shell consisted of layered energy shields and armor plates that had never been breached. The central spire housed the command center where He-jin now stood, surrounded by the soft hum of machinery and the quiet efficiency of his drachnid crew. "Another victory for the archives," Commander said, his second-in-command, Officer Rina, approaching with a datapad. She moved with the characteristic grace of their species, her armored scales reflecting the distant starlight. "The Moraxians lost 43 ships, 0 casualties on our side." He-jin nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "Add it to the wall." He gestured to the holographic display, showing their unbroken record. 312 species had attempted to breach the fortress. 312 had failed. The wall was his pride, a testament to drachnid superiority. Each failed assault added another mark to their legacy, proving what he had always believed, that their technology and tactical prowess were unmatched in the galaxy. A young officer rushed into the command center, his scales still bearing the green tint of youth. "Commander, new contact detected at the edge of our sensor range." He-jin turned from the window, his interest piqued. "Show me." The main display activated, revealing a single ship-holding position just outside their defensive perimeter. It was unlike anything they had encountered before. Sleek, almost artistic in its design, with smooth lines that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. "Scan results," Commander Rina reported, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "The vessel appears to be human." A murmur ran through the command center. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel barely 50 years ago. Their territory was small, their technology considered primitive by most standards. They had never shown any military ambitions beyond defending their borders. "A single ship?" He-jin asked, mandibles clicking in amusement. "They send one vessel against the might of Yongsan." "Receiving transmission," the communications officer announced. He-jin straightened his uniform, preparing to deliver his usual speech about the futility of their attempt. On screen, the message that appeared was text only, simple and direct. "We accept your challenge." He-jin read it twice, then laughed. The sound echoed through the command center, deep and resonant. "They accept our challenge, with one ship." "Should we power up the defense grid?" Rina asked, already moving toward her station. He-jin raised a hand, stopping her. "No. Let them come closer. I want to see what makes these humans think they can succeed where hundreds have failed." He walked to his command chair, settling into it with deliberate calm. "Scan that ship again. I want to know everything about it." The results were puzzling. The human vessel showed no extraordinary power readings, no massive weapon systems, nothing that could possibly threaten the fortress. It was relatively small, perhaps a kilometer in length, with what appeared to be standard shields and conventional armament. "They're either fools or they know something we don't," Rina observed quietly. He-jin studied the image of the ship, noting its elegant design. "Send them clearance to approach, but keep all weapons locked on their position." The human vessel began moving forward, its approach measured and confident. He-jin watched it grow larger on the main screen, trying to understand their strategy. In all his years commanding Yongsan, he had never seen an attack begin like this. "Commander," the sensor officer called out, "I'm detecting unusual energy patterns from their hull. They don't match any known configuration." He-jin leaned forward in his chair. "Elaborate." "It's as if the ship is absorbing energy from space itself. But that's impossible with current technology." The human vessel continued its approach, now close enough to be visible through the command center's windows. Its hull seemed to shift color slightly, adapting to the surrounding space. "They're hailing us again," the communications officer reported. He-Jin nodded. "Let's hear what they have to say before we add them to our wall of victories." A new message appeared. "Commander He-Jin, we've studied every failed attempt to breach your fortress. We've learned from their mistakes. We bring something new to this challenge: human ingenuity. Prepare yourself." The command center fell silent. He-Jin rose from his chair, moving back to the window to study the approaching ship with his own eyes. For the first time in centuries, he felt a slight tremor of uncertainty. These humans were different. They didn't boast of their power or threaten with grand speeches. They simply stated their intention with quiet confidence. "Rina," he said softly, "power up all defensive systems. Something tells me this battle will be interesting." As he watched the human ship take up position before the fortress, He-Jin realized this might be more than just another mark on their wall of victories. The humans had done something no other species had. They had made him curious. The fortress's automatic defense systems began tracking the vessel, ready to unleash their devastating power. But He-Jin held them in check, wanting to see what these newcomers would do first. His collection of victories could wait a few more minutes. In all his years commanding the fortress, he had learned to trust his instincts. And right now, those instincts were telling him that this day would be different. Whether that meant victory or defeat remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the humans had already succeeded in doing what no other species had done before. They had made Commander He-Jin of the mighty Yongsan fortress wonder if, perhaps, his wall of victories was about to face its greatest test. Admiral J1 adjusted her uniform collar as she waited outside the military council chambers. The thick metal doors bore Earth's new insignia, a representation of humanity's first faster-than-light ship emerging from a spiral galaxy. Through the windows, Earth's gleaming orbital rings caught the morning sunlight. The chamber doors opened with a soft hiss. "Admiral, they're ready for you," announced Lieutenant Kim, her aide. Jai-1 gathered her data tablets and walked into the circular chamber. 7 council members sat at elevated desks, their faces illuminated by holographic displays. The room's center held a large projection platform, where she would present humanity's boldest military project. Admiral Jai-1. General Park spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades of military service. "You're here to present the HFY Story project. We've reviewed the preliminary reports, but given the resources invested, we need your personal assurance. This isn't a fool's errand." Jai-1 placed her hand on the control panel, and a hologram of the HFY Story materialized above the platform. The ship's design was unlike anything humanity had built before. Sleek, almost predatory in appearance, with smooth curves that seemed to bend light around its hull. "Distinguished council members," Jai-1 began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "For 3 years, we've studied every recorded attempt to breach the Yongsan fortress. Each failure taught us something valuable. But more importantly, we learned what no other species has realized. The fortress's greatest strength is also its weakness." She manipulated the controls, and the hologram zoomed in on the ship's hull structure. The Drachnids rely on overwhelming force, using massive energy weapons to destroy their opponents. But the HFY Story doesn't try to match their firepower. Instead, it turns their own energy against them. The council members leaned forward as she demonstrated the quantum shield technology, layers of specialized particles that could absorb and redirect energy, storing it for later use, the result of countless sleepless nights and failed experiments. "Every shot they fire at us will only make us stronger," Jai-1 explained. "The quantum shields don't just block their attacks, they harvest the energy. And when the time is right, we can release it all in one devastating counterattack." Admiral Lee, the eldest council member, spoke up. "The theory is impressive, But this has never been tested in actual combat. We would be risking our most advanced vessel on an unproven strategy. Jai-1 nodded. That's why we've spent the last 6 months running simulations using actual battle data from previous attacks on the fortress. I'd like to show you the results. The hologram changed to display a series of combat scenarios. In each one, the Daejeon's systems performed exactly as designed, absorbing and redirecting energy with increasing efficiency. But there's something else, Jai-1 continued. Something that gives us an advantage no other species had. She paused, making eye contact with each council member. We're not going there to destroy them. We're going to show them a better way. General Park raised an eyebrow. Explain. Every species that attacked the fortress did so with overwhelming force, massive fleets, planet-destroying weapons. They tried to prove their superiority through destruction. We're sending one ship, offering them a choice between continuing their isolation or joining a larger community. The chamber fell silent as the council members considered her words. G1 could feel the weight of the moment. Humanity's future in the galaxy might depend on their decision. Admiral Lee spoke again. The crew, they understand the risks. Every member volunteered specifically for this mission. They believe in what we're trying to achieve. The council members began speaking quietly among themselves. G1 waited, her hands clasped behind her back, watching the hologram of the Daejeon slowly rotate above the platform. Finally, General Park raised his hand for silence. Admiral G1, your presentation has been most thorough. But I have one final question. Why are you so certain this will work? Jai-1 smiled slightly. Because we're doing something no other species has tried. We're not just challenging their military might. We're challenging their understanding of strength itself. The Drachnids believe power comes from the ability to destroy. We're going to show them that true power lies in the ability to adapt, to turn opposition into opportunity. The council members exchanged glances. General Park nodded slowly and pressed a button on his desk. The chamber's lights brightened. The council's decision is unanimous, he announced. Project Daejeon is approved. You have authorization to proceed with the mission. Jai-1's shoulders relaxed slightly, though she maintained her professional composure. Thank you, council members. We won't let you down. As she gathered her data tablets to leave, Admiral Lee approached her. Admiral, he said quietly, I've seen many brave plans in my career. But this could change everything. Good luck. Jai-1 left the chamber, Lieutenant Kim falling into step beside her. As they walked toward the transport that would take them to the orbital shipyards, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate the magnitude of what they were about to attempt. The EWS Daejeon wasn't just a warship, it was humanity's statement to the galaxy. They would face the mighty fortress not with a fleet of destroyers, but with a single ship carrying a revolutionary idea. An idea that strength could be found in transformation rather than destruction. Now they just had to prove it. Space rippled like disturbed water as the EWS Daejeon tore through the fabric of hyperspace. Captain Du Young watched the massive fortress emerge into view, its size making his ship look like a small fish before a whale. The Yongsan's dark metal surface bristled with weapon ports, each one capable of destroying a small fleet. Exit from hyperspace complete, Captain, reported the navigation officer. All systems functioning at optimal levels. Do Young nodded, his eyes fixed on the fortress. Despite months of preparation, seeing it in person made his throat go dry. The stories hadn't exaggerated its size or menace. Lieutenant Tari's voice cut through his thoughts. Multiple weapon locks detected, Captain. They're painting us with targeting systems from at least 50 different positions. She paused, checking her readings. Make that 75 and counting. Quantum shields holding steady, the engineering officer added. Power absorption systems ready. The bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, each member focusing on their tasks while trying not to stare at the enormous structure filling their view screen. The Daejeon's bridge was smaller than most warships, designed for a minimal crew. Every surface gleamed with new technology, looking more like a scientific research vessel than a warship. "Sir," Tae-ri called out, "they're hailing us." Do-young straightened in his command chair. On screen, the image of Commander Hee-jin appeared, his scaled face showing what could only be described as amused contempt. "Human vessel, you've traveled a long way to join our wall of defeats. One ship against Yongsan. Your species is either very brave or very foolish." Do-young met the Drachnid commander's gaze steadily. "We prefer to think of it as efficient. Why waste a fleet when one ship will suffice?" A rumbling sound came through the communication channel. Hee-jin was laughing. "Your confidence is entertaining. Perhaps we should add your ship to our museum instead of destroying it. A reminder of human audacity." "Before you make that decision," Do-young replied calmly, "perhaps you'd like to see what this single ship can do." The fortress's weapons powered up, their energy readings spiking on Tae-ri's displays. The Drachnid commander's expression hardened. "Very well. Show us what brings such confidence to such a young species." The communication ended, leaving the bridge in momentary silence. Do-young looked at his crew, seeing determination in their faces. They had trained for months for this moment. "Take us into position," he ordered. "Begin pattern Alpha." The Daejin moved forward with graceful precision, its hull seeming to shimmer as the quantum shields activated fully. The fortress tracked their movement, its weapon ports glowing with gathered energy. "First volley incoming," Tae-ri announced. "Multiple energy weapons charging." Do-young allowed himself a small smile. "Just as we planned. Engage absorption protocols." The fortress fired, its weapons releasing enough energy to vaporize a conventional ship. The beams struck the Daejin's quantum shields, but instead of exploding or being deflected, they seemed to sink into the ship's hull, creating patterns of light that flowed like water. On his command chair's display, Do-young watched the power readings climb. Every shot the fortress fired was being converted into usable energy, strengthening their shields and charging their own weapons. "They're increasing power to their weapons," Tae-ri reported. "They seemed confused by our lack of damage." The fortress fired again, this time with enough force to destroy a small moon. The Daejin's hull blazed with absorbed energy, but held firm. Do-young could imagine the confusion on the Drachnid command deck. "Sir, they're hailing us again," Tae-ri said. Hee-jin's face appeared, showing the first signs of concern. "What trickery is this? No shield can withstand such power." "Not a trick, Commander," Do-young replied. "Just a different way of thinking about strength. Your weapons are impressive, but what if I told you we're not here to destroy your fortress? Then why have you come? To show you something new. To prove that the greatest power doesn't come from destruction, but from transformation." Do-young gestured to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Tae-ri, show them a fraction of what we've absorbed." The Daejin released a tiny portion of its stored energy in a controlled burst. The beam was small but perfectly focused, slicing through the fortress's outer shields like they weren't there. Alarms blared on the Drachnid command deck. Hee-jin's eyes widened as he received damage reports. "Impossible. That was just one shot from one ship. Using your own energy against you," Do-young explained. "We could continue this demonstration, or we could talk about a different future. One where the Yongsan fortress becomes something more than a monument to war." The bridge crew held their breath, watching the Drachnid commander's face as he processed this new reality. 3 centuries of certainty had just been challenged by a single human ship. Hee-jin's expression shifted from shock to something close to respect. Perhaps we should have this discussion, Captain Do-young. You've certainly earned our attention." As the communication ended, Do-young looked at his crew. "Well done, everyone. Phase 1 complete." He turned to face the fortress, its imposing bulk no longer seeming quite so invincible. "Now comes the hard part, teaching an old fortress new tricks." The Daejin held its position, its hull still gleaming with absorbed energy, ready for whatever came next. They had achieved what no other species had managed. They had made the mighty Yongsan fortress question its own assumptions about power. Commander He-jin broke off diplomatic communications with a snarl. "Target that ship with everything we have. I want to see those shields fail." The fortress's weapon systems roared to life, unleashing a barrage that could have reduced a planet to ash. Energy beams of every color streaked across space, converging on the lone human vessel. Aboard the Daejin, Lieutenant Tyree's hands moved with practiced precision across her tactical console. Multiple impacts incoming. Quantum shield grid engaging at full capacity. Captain Du Young watched calmly as the storm of weapons fire struck their ship. The Daejin's hull began to glow with absorbed energy, patterns of light flowing like rivers across its surface. Each impact made the patterns brighter, more complex. "Shield status?" Du Young asked. "Operating at 120% capacity, sir," reported the engineering officer. "The excess energy is feeding directly into our storage systems." Through the bridge viewport, they could see the fortress continuing its relentless assault. New weapon ports opened along its surface, adding their power to the attack. The space between the two vessels became a corridor of pure energy. "They're targeting our engines now," Tairi announced, adjusting shield harmonics to compensate. Her fingers flew across the controls, redirecting power flows with microsecond precision. Energy absorption rate increasing. Do Young nodded. "Begin Phase 2. Show them what their own power can do." Tairi initiated the sequence they had practiced countless times. The absorbed energy began cycling through the ship's specialized systems, creating a feedback loop that amplified its strength. On the fortress command deck, Ho-jin stared at his sensor readings in disbelief. "Impossible. They're not just blocking our weapons. They're getting stronger." "Sir," his weapons officer reported, "our energy readings are showing unusual patterns. The human ship seems to be processing our attacks somehow." He-jin leaned forward in his command chair. "Increase power to all weapon systems. They can't absorb everything." The fortress responded, its weapons climbing to power levels that had never been necessary before. The attack intensified, turning space itself into a blinding display of destructive force. But the Daejin remained intact. More than intact, it was thriving. The quantum shields had transformed from a defensive barrier into an energy collection system of unprecedented efficiency. "Power levels now at 200% of baseline," Tairi reported with quiet satisfaction. "Ready to implement countermeasures on your order, Captain." Do Young studied the tactical display, watching the fortress's attack patterns. "Begin the dance, Lieutenant. Show them what we can do with all this borrowed energy." Tairi's hands moved in an intricate pattern across her console. The Daejin began to move, its motions precise and calculated. Each maneuver placed them exactly where they needed to be to maximize energy absorption while minimizing strain on their systems. "Sir," He-jin's sensor officer called out in alarm. "The human vessel. It's using our weapon frequencies to boost its own power signature. Every shot we fire is making them exponentially stronger." He-jin watched as his most powerful weapons that had never failed before, seemed to dissolve into the human ship's defenses. Centuries of military doctrine were being undone by a single vessel's innovative approach. Back on the Daejin, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, each member focused on their role in this carefully choreographed performance. They weren't just surviving the attack, they were turning it into their greatest advantage. "Power levels approaching critical storage capacity," the engineering officer warned. Do Young nodded. "Lieutenant Tairi, prepare to demonstrate what we've learned from their hospitality." Tairi's fingers danced across her console one final time, initiating the sequence they had prepared for this moment. The Daejin's hull began to pulse with contained energy, the accumulated power of the fortress's own weapons waiting to be redirected. "Target their primary weapon clusters," Du Young ordered. "Minimal power, maximum precision. We're here to teach, not destroy." The Daejin released a series of perfectly controlled energy bursts. Each one struck a weapon port on the fortress, using the exact frequency needed to disable it without causing catastrophic damage. On the fortress command deck, weapon systems began shutting down one by one. Hijin watched helplessly as his supposedly invincible arsenal was systematically neutralized by their own energy, turned against them with surgical precision. All primary weapon clusters disabled, Tairi reported. Secondary systems still operational but operating at reduced capacity. Do Young opened a channel to the fortress. Commander Hijin, I believe this demonstration has made our point. Shall we return to our discussion about the future? The fortress's command deck was silent as Hijin considered their situation. His most powerful weapons had been turned into tools for his opponent's victory. But more than that, the humans had shown remarkable restraint. They could have destroyed the fortress, but instead chose to disable and teach. Perhaps, Hijin replied slowly, it is time for the Yongsan fortress to learn some new lessons about power. He paused, looking at the human ship that had accomplished what hundreds of alien fleets could not. And it seems humanity has much to teach us. The Daejeon's bridge crew exchanged quiet smiles. Their strategy had worked perfectly, not just the technology, but the philosophy behind it. They had shown that the greatest victory sometimes comes not from destruction, but from transformation. Lieutenant Tairi began powering down the combat systems, her console still glowing with the energy they had harvested. The battle was over, but its impact would reshape the galaxy's understanding of power and progress. The massive energy readings from the Yongsan Fortress's power core began to fluctuate wildly. Warning lights flashed across control panels as system after system reported unstable power levels. Commander Hijin watched in growing horror as his impregnable fortress began showing signs of weakness for the first time in its centuries-long history. Sir, Shield Grid 7 through 12 are showing critical power loss, reported his chief engineer, fingers racing across multiple screens. The human vessel, it's not just absorbing our attacks, it's creating some kind of resonance effect in our power distribution network. On the bridge of the EWS Daejeon, Captain Do Young monitored the situation with steady focus. The quantum shield technology was performing beyond their most optimistic projections, turning each Drachnid attack into fuel for their own systems. Lieutenant Tairi, status report on the energy collection, he ordered. Main capacitors at 95% capacity and rising. She responded, her hands moving precisely across her tactical station. The fortress's attack patterns are becoming erratic. Their power grid is destabilizing exactly as we predicted. Through the bridge viewport, they could see sections of the fortress's massive shield barrier flickering and failing. The supposedly impenetrable defense system that had withstood attacks from hundreds of species was being undone by its own power, reflected and amplified by human ingenuity. Hijin's voice crackled over the communication channel, tension evident in his tone. What have you done to our systems? This is impossible. Not impossible, Commander, Du Young replied calmly. We simply found a way to use your strength against you. Every attack you launch feeds our power reserves, while creating interference patterns in your own grid. The fortress fired another barrage, more out of desperation than strategy. The Daejeon's quantum shields absorbed the energy smoothly, its hull glowing with stored power. The patterns of light flowing across its surface had become so bright, they were painful to look at directly. Main weapon charging sequence initiated, Tairi announced. Power levels exceeding all previous tests. Do Young nodded. Show them what their own energy can do when properly focused. The Daejeon's main weapon array came online, channeling the collected power into a single coherent beam. The shot struck the fortress's weakened shields with surgical precision, causing a cascade of failures across its defensive grid. On the fortress command deck, chaos erupted as systems began shutting down. Shield sectors 13 through 29 offline, shouted the defense officer. Power core showing signs of instability. Hijin watched helplessly as his mighty fortress's defenses crumbled section by section. Centuries of assumed superiority were being dismantled by a single human vessel using tactics no one had ever considered. Sir, His second-in-command reported, "We're detecting power surges throughout the station. The human ship's attacks are somehow synchronized with our own energy frequency. Each hit is amplifying the destabilization effect." The Daijin continued its calculated assault, each shot precisely targeted to exploit the weaknesses their analysis had revealed. They weren't trying to destroy the fortress, just demonstrate the futility of its resistance. Engineering reports critical power fluctuations in all remaining shield generators. Tairi updated. Their defensive grid is approaching total collapse. Do Young opened a channel to the fortress. "Commander Heijin, your shields are failing. Your weapons are only making us stronger. Are you prepared to discuss terms?" The fortress shuddered as another section of shields failed. Heijin looked at the damage reports flooding his screens, then at the human ship that had accomplished what countless fleets had failed to do. "How?" he asked, his voice barely hiding his disbelief. "How did you know this would work?" "We studied every failed attack on your fortress," Du Yum explained. "Each species tried to overwhelm your defenses with brute force. None of them considered using your own power against you. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from understanding your opponent's weaknesses, including the ones they don't know they have." The fortress's remaining shields flickered weakly. Emergency alerts blared throughout the station as power systems struggled to compensate for the cascading failures. "Final shield sectors failing," Tairi reported. "The fortress is defenseless." Do Young stood from his command chair, looking at the once mighty station through the viewport. "Commander Heijin, we could destroy your fortress now, but that's not why we came. We're here to show you a better way. A future where strength isn't measured by destructive power alone." Heijin's command deck had fallen silent, the reality of their situation sinking in. Their undefeated fortress, the symbol of Drachnid superiority, had been defeated not by overwhelming force but by elegant strategy. "Perhaps," Heijin said slowly, "it is time for us to learn new definitions of power." He paused, looking at the damage reports with new understanding. "You have proven your point, Captain Du Young. The Yongsan Fortress surrenders." The tension on both bridges eased slightly. The Daijin's crew maintained their professional composure, but there was pride in their eyes. They had achieved their objective without unnecessary destruction. "A wise decision, Commander," Du Young replied. "Shall we begin discussions about the fortress's new role in a peaceful galaxy?" As power systems throughout the fortress began to stabilize, both commanders realized they were witnessing a historic moment. The galaxy's mightiest fortress had fallen not to violence and destruction, but to innovation and strategic thinking. It was a lesson that would reshape the balance of power throughout known space. And aboard the Daijin, Lieutenant Tairi allowed herself a small smile as she powered down the weapon systems. They had proven that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in the size of their fleet or the power of their weapons, but in their ability to think differently about the nature of strength itself. The EWS Daijin's main weapon array hummed with accumulated power, its capacitors straining to contain the massive amount of energy absorbed from the fortress's attacks. Captain Du Young stood at his command station, watching the final calculations scroll across his display. "All systems aligned," Lieutenant Tairi reported. "Main cannon charged to maximum safe capacity. Target locked on their primary power core." The fortress hung before them, its once mighty defenses now flickering like a dying star. Years of careful planning had led to this moment, the culmination of humanity's most ambitious military operation. "Commander Heijin," Du Young transmitted, "this is your final warning. Your fortress's shields are failing. We have enough power to destroy your entire station." The Drachnid commander's response came through filled with static. "You cannot expect us to simply surrender our greatest achievement to a single human vessel." "Target locked," Tairi announced quietly. "Awaiting your command, sir." Do Young took a deep breath. "Fire." The Daijin's main cannon released its stored energy in a single focused beam. The shot carried the combined power of hundreds of Drachnid weapon impacts, refined and concentrated by human engineering. It struck the fortress's weakened shields with surgical precision. Inside the fortress, He Jin watched in horror as the impossible happened. The human weapon pierced through their remaining defenses like they weren't there, cutting deep into the station's superstructure. Primary power core destabilizing. His engineering chief shouted. Containment fields failing across all sectors. The fortress shuddered violently. Emergency lights flashed throughout its corridors as backup systems tried desperately to compensate for the damage. Sir, He Jin's second-in-command reported, we're losing control of critical systems. The human weapon, it's created some kind of resonance cascade in our power grid. He Jin looked at the chaos erupting around his command center. Screens showed multiple system failures spreading throughout the station. The mighty Yongsan fortress, undefeated for centuries, was being torn apart from the inside by its own power. Begin emergency evacuation, he ordered, his voice heavy with the weight of defeat. Get all non-essential personnel to the escape pods. On the Daejeon's bridge, Tairi monitored the fortress's deteriorating condition. Their power grid is collapsing, Captain. Secondary explosions detected in multiple sectors. Do Young opened another channel to the fortress. Commander He Jin, your station is failing. Let us help evacuate your people. This doesn't need to end in tragedy. The fortress's internal structure groaned as power surges ripped through its corridors. He Jin watched his crew rushing to emergency stations, centuries of pride crumbling around them. Engineering reports critical overload in the main reactor. His systems officer called out. We can't contain it much longer. He Jin gripped his command chair as another tremor shook the station. The humans had done more than defeat them. They had shown the fundamental flaw in their approach to power itself. Captain Du Young, he transmitted, his voice steady despite the chaos. I accept your offer of assistance. Help us save our people. The Daejeon's crew sprang into action. Tairi's fingers flew across her tactical console, coordinating with the fortress's remaining systems to organize the evacuation. Launching rescue shuttles, she reported. Beginning emergency transport procedures. The space between the ships filled with escape pods and rescue vessels. The Daejeon's advanced systems helped guide them to safety, ensuring no lives were lost in the fortress's final moments. He Jin remained on his command deck, overseeing the evacuation of his crew. As the last groups made their way to safety, Du Young's voice came through again. Commander, our scans show your command center's structural integrity is failing. You need to leave now. The Drachnid commander looked around his empty bridge one last time. Screens still flickered with damage reports, showing the death throes of what had once been the galaxy's mightiest fortress. The terms of surrender, Captain Du Young, he asked as he made his way to the last escape pod. Simple ones, Du Young replied. Join us in building something better than this fortress. Help us create defenses that protect rather than dominate. He Jin reached his escape pod just as another section of the command deck collapsed. As he launched away from his dying fortress, he watched the Daejeon coordinating the rescue effort with impressive efficiency. The human ship had done more than defeat them. It had shown them a different way of thinking about power and strength. Their single devastating shot had been followed not by destruction, but by mercy and aid. From the Daejeon's bridge, Du Young watched the rescue operation continue. All evacuees accounted for, Captain, Tairi reported. Commander He Jin's pod is safely away from the fortress. The mighty Yongsan fortress, which had stood undefeated for centuries, began its final collapse. But thanks to human intervention, its legacy would not be one of destruction. Instead, it would mark the beginning of a new era, one where strength was measured not just in firepower, but in the wisdom to know when not to use it. As the last rescue shuttles docked with the Daejeon, Du Young opened a channel to all survivors. Welcome aboard, he said simply. Let's begin discussing how to build something better together. The fortress's remains drifted in space, a testament to the end of one age and the beginning of another. The galaxy's mightiest fortress had fallen not to overwhelming force, but to a single ship carrying a revolutionary idea. That true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the choice to protect and preserve. Word of the Yongsan fortress's defeat traveled faster than light speed through the galaxy's communication networks. Species that had suffered defeats at its weapons could hardly believe the news. A single human ship had accomplished what entire fleets could not. Admiral G1 stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching construction drones swarm around the former fortress. Where weapon ports once bristled, new structures were taking shape. The fortress's dark hull was being transformed. Sections opened to let in starlight for the first time in centuries. The latest reports from the Convergent Project, Admiral, her aide said, offering a datapad. The Drachnid engineers are working well with our teams. They're particularly impressed with the design for the new training facilities. Jaiwan nodded, studying the progress. The fortress that had once symbolized military might was becoming something entirely different, a center for peaceful cooperation and learning. In a nearby conference room, Commander He Jin sat with representatives from 20 different species, discussing the Academy's curriculum. The former fortress commander had surprised everyone with his enthusiasm for the project. Our greatest mistake, he told the assembled delegates, was believing that power came only from the ability to destroy. The humans showed us a different kind of strength. The delegates murmured in agreement. Many of them represented worlds that had once launched failed attacks against the fortress. Now they were working together to create something new. Captain Du Young, who had been asked to lead the Academy's Tactical Training Division, joined the meeting. The first class of students arrives next month, he reported. We have applications from over 50 species. The news channels across the galaxy couldn't get enough of the story. They broadcast images of the fortress's transformation daily, showing how weapon systems were being converted into training facilities and defense laboratories into classrooms. Lieutenant Tairi, now Chief Instructor of Advanced Defense Systems, worked closely with Drachnid engineers to develop new protective technologies. The quantum shield system that had defeated the fortress was being adapted for peaceful purposes, creating better ways to protect civilian ships and colonies. The principles remain the same, she explained to a group of eager students. But instead of using absorbed energy for weapons, we're learning to redirect it for shield reinforcement and power generation. Admiral Jae-won made regular inspections of the progress. During one such visit, she found He Jin in what had been his command center, now transformed into the Academy's main lecture hall. Having second thoughts, Commander? She asked, noting his thoughtful expression. He Jin shook his head. No. For centuries, we thought we were teaching the galaxy about power. Now we're finally learning what power truly means. The Galactic Council had been impressed by humanity's handling of the situation. Instead of destroying or occupying the fortress, they had turned it into a symbol of unity. Species that had been bitter enemies now sent their best and brightest to study together. The humans could have destroyed us, a Drachnid Council member noted during a session. Instead, they showed us a better path. We would be fools not to follow it. The Academy's first graduation ceremony was held exactly 1 year after the fortress's surrender. Students from across the galaxy gathered in the former main hangar, now a grand assembly hall. The ceiling had been replaced with transparent panels, letting the light of distant stars shine down on the proceedings. Admiral Ji-won stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd. Drachnid sat next to species they had once targeted with the fortress's weapons. Former enemies exchanged ideas and plans for joint projects. This academy, she began, stands as proof that the greatest victories don't come from destroying our opponents, but from transforming our understanding of strength itself. In the audience, Captain Du Young and Lieutenant Tairi sat with Commander He Jin, watching their first class of students receive their certifications. The graduates would go on to serve not just their own worlds, but the entire galactic community. We've created something remarkable here, He Jin observed quietly, something that will last far longer than the fortress ever could have. The Academy quickly became known throughout the galaxy as a symbol of what could be achieved through cooperation rather than conflict. Its graduates went on to develop new technologies and strategies focused on protection rather than destruction. The former fortress's reputation changed completely. Where ships had once approached in fear, they now arrived carrying eager students and visiting dignitaries. The dark corridors that had echoed with weapon fire now rang with voices speaking dozens of languages, sharing ideas, and building friendships. Admiral J1 often ended her day by walking through the Academy's halls, listening to the buzz of activity. Sometimes she would stop at the observation deck, looking out at the stars and the steady stream of ships arriving from across the galaxy. The mighty fortress had fallen, but something far stronger had risen in its place. Not a barrier between species, but a bridge connecting them. Not a symbol of fear, but a beacon of hope. And somewhere in the Academy's vast library, preserved as a reminder, sat the original battle logs of the EWS, Dajan's historic encounter. They served as a lesson to all who studied there. True strength lies not in the weapons we build, but in the choices we make about how to use our power. The galaxy had learned its lesson well. The fortress that had once represented the might of war now stood as a testament to the power of peace.